Hi, Miranda Darrow here with another list of book recommendations for this month's genre. Last month, we talked about women's fiction, and I gave a list of recommendations. And so please check out that video on my channel if you'd like to see those recommendations. For October, in honor of Halloween, we're talking about horror genre. And specifically, my recommendations will be more accessible horror, stories for readers who aren't already huge horror fans. These could be some horror genre entry points. First, I want to mention that there's a fair amount of overlap between horror and two other genres that I read more frequently. The first is mystery, because suspense and thriller novels are often listed under the umbrella genre of mystery, suspense, and thriller, MST. But if the novel also invokes primal fears and uses horror genre tropes like a killer stalking the protagonist, many of these novels could fall into both mystery and horror. I read a ton of books in this sweet spot, but only included a handful on this list. Suspense and thrillers will definitely get more attention from me in an upcoming month when I'm focusing on that genre. The books in that category that I've listed here as horror all have it as one of their searchable genres in my Goodreads list. So someone besides me thinks that they have the body count or give enough creepy feelings to qualify as horror as well as mystery. The other genre that has a fair amount of overlap is speculative fiction. Speculative fiction is an umbrella category that includes fantasy, science fiction, and horror, as long as they have a speculative element. So speculative is something that you don't find in the real world. All of the paranormal tropes and supernatural beings on this list can be considered speculative fiction, all of the monsters, as well as horror. In last week's video, I mentioned a bunch of titles in my explanation of various horror subgenres, tropes, and themes. There will be some overlap, but I tried to dig a little deeper into my list, into my database of books read, to find some exciting new titles for you. So here we go. If you like sexy vampires, you might enjoy some vampires with sharper fangs. Here's a list. All These Bodies by Kendare Blake has a fun historical setting in the summer of 1958, when 16 bodies are left completely drained of blood. Could it be vampires? Nah, they don't exist. Or do they? The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix also features a fun, recent historical setting, this time the 1990s in the southern United States, with a book club taking arms against a charming local vampire, because it's better to be well-read than undead. Another one, Vampire Weekend by Mike Chen, gave me all the Lost Boy vibes, where being undead pairs well with the punk rock lifestyle of a young woman who has cut ties to all of her family and friends in order to avoid being detected as an undead. And the utterly uninteresting and unadventurous tales of Fred, the Vampire Accountant by Drew Hayes is great if you would like some humor with your horror. Fred is, as stated, an accountant, and he's a vampire. And Fred's a narrator with a very dry sense of humor. This is a great starting point. If you're not sure, it's not too scary, it's funny. But then, on the scarier side, Certain Dark Things by Silvia Morena Garcia has vampires. I listed another book by this author in last week's video, and honestly, I would recommend all of Silvia Garcia Moreno's books, including her Shark Attack book, Untamed Shore. You can't go wrong with Garcia Moreno. Then we have The Lost Girls by Sonia Hartle. This is my favorite from this group of vampire stories. It's like John Tucker Must Die, with the louse in question, a vampire named Elton. He dumped our heroine, Holly, a few decades after turning her into a vampire in the 1980s, while he had promised to love her forever in order for her to change with him. Forever was not a very long time, and being undead is. Holly meets up with several other vampire ex-girlfriends of Elton, and together they try to save Elton's latest girlfriend from joining their ranks, all while Holly is falling for the latest target. Oh, I kind of love that. Okay, if you prefer zombies or other creatures to vampires, I have a few on this list too. Let's start with some zombies. We've got Reboot by Amy Tintera. This stars one of the zombies, that's the POV character, reanimated to be used as soldiers in a war because they've lost at least a good chunk of their humanity. Our heroine is considered the most unhuman of all the reboots because of the amount of time between her death and her reboot, her reanimation. But she meets her love interest, a man who is literally fresh meat and nearly human due to his quick reboot after his demise. The zombie POV reminded me of iZombie. Then we have, so much atmosphere in this one, The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. It's decidedly not a romance, with multiple perspectives, including that of one of the children in a room in a special school where the teachers have to stay back so they don't get bitten. We know that these children can think, but can they feel? And then my favorite on this list, not a zombie, Devolution, a firsthand account of the Rainier Sasquatch Massacre by Max Brooks. This is the person who also wrote World War Z, about a zombie apocalypse. Like the title says, our group of characters live in a remote village up in the mountains. We read through an after-the-fact account, a bunch of diary entries of what happened when the Sasquatches showed up. This was my favorite from this group, as I am a fan of found journal account stories. In that same vein, I also loved When the English Fall by David Williams, which doesn't include any supernatural creatures, but it does have an account of what happens in an Amish community after an EMP takes out all of the electronic devices for all of their neighbors. Next, if you are a fan of dystopian stories in other genres, check out some of the horror. They have unique forms of the apocalypse to arrive. First up, The Salt Line by Holly Goddard Jones. This is a world impacted by killer bugs. They're like ticks that roam free in most of the globe, but they cannot cross thick salt barriers that are erected around cities, and only cities that have the resources to protect themselves from the bug scourge. Everyone else has fallen victim to these ticks. And of course, this is years ago. Some people now, rich people, think it's a grand idea to venture outside the salt barrier into the world for fun and adventure. What could go wrong? Or The Last One by Alexandra Olivia has an apocalypse happen when a bunch of people are isolated during the filming of a survival type reality show. It's a new show, and it takes the contestants a little while to figure out that the stuff going down is real and not scripted. It's like the opposite of The Truman Show. And if you like an apocalypse in which people turn into rage zombies based on something pretty normal, like not getting bit by a zombie, I've got some great rage zombie stories for you too. The first is Bird Box by Josh Malerman, who puts readers in a world where opening your eyes and seeing something outside can cause a person to go insane and kill everyone. We don't know what the something is because our POV character hasn't seen it. Attempts to videotape it have ended up with people going crazy. There's just no way to do it. Another fun, oh hey, that's an interesting way to make rage zombies, is The Blondes by Emily Schultz. It's a satire in which blonde women are going into a psychotic rage and everyone is rounding up the blondes. Some are trying to dye their hair, some are trying to shave their heads, others are trying to sneak into Canada because this somehow seems to be a problem mainly in the United States. It's a good day to not be blonde in this universe. But if you're looking for a satirical approach, it's a good one. Do you enjoy a rich Gothic setting in stories like Jane Eyre, Mansfield Park, and Wuthering Heights? If so, you might want to check out some Gothic horror. We'll start with a modern take. The Stranger Upstairs by Lisa M. Matlin is a contemporary Gothic. The main character is a recently disgraced social media influencer who buys a murder house for cheap, because murder does that to the price of your home, with plans to revamp the house and her image. Mexican Gothic by Silvia Morena Garcia features a creepy old house that only the love of family could tempt our heroine to enter. And for good reason, it's creepy. Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth has two timelines. One, a historical at a creepy old boarding school, and a contemporary timeline with actors and producers putting together a show about what happened at that creepy old boarding school. The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz spins what should be a great opportunity to get published into a nightmare. Challenged to write a novel during the month-long writing retreat in a horror author's rather gothic mansion, our main character is in competition with other writers for a publishing deal, but someone starts taking out the competition. And then there's The Missing Years by Lexi Elliott, in a creepy old Scottish manor, inherited in part by our heroine and in part by her dad that she hasn't seen in years. Why not move in? Or The One Left by Riley Sager, who writes a ton of great horror books, This one features a suspected family annihilator living in a creepy mansion that's sliding into the sea ever so slightly. I love the descriptions of this mansion and the recently disgraced young woman who is sent to care for her. If Gothic setting isn't your thing, but you do like an interesting setting, here are some other ones. There's road trips. I've got 5 Survive by Holly Jackson, which features a road trip from Hades. A bunch of friends in an RV for spring break, and a sniper is after one of them. But which one and why? Or another road trip, 5 Total Strangers by Natalie D. Richards. This also features a road trip. A bunch of people who are stranded at an airport decide to rent a car together and drive through a snowstorm to get to the city where there was the destination of their flight. What could possibly go wrong with a bunch of strangers in a rental car driving through a snowstorm? Now about Airbnbs, like You Shouldn't Have Come Here by Geneva Rose. This reinforces all the reasons I've ever needed to not want to stay in an Airbnb. No thanks. I'll take the 2-star hotel room instead, rather than staying in somebody's place. Another book in that vein, Secluded Cabin Sleep 6 by Lisa Unger. It's another reason to stay in a hotel or bring your own camper. This time it's a whole group and they think they have the vacation rental to themselves. And then there are ones set in the woods, starting with The Dark, Dark Wood by Ruth Boyer. This is set in a remote cabin for a hen party, which I found out while reading this is a bachelorette party. There's no cell service, no neighbors, and people start dropping dead. Or The Silent Woods by Kimmy Cunningham Grant. This is my favorite in this funky setting group. Cooper and his daughter have lived in a remote cabin in the Appalachian woods for 8 years. Cooper has a friend who brings them supplies once a year until he doesn't. What are they hiding from? And will it find them in the woods? The suspense and the voice is just such a delicious slow build. We also have The Lake by Natasha Preston, set at a summer camp with a classic horror setting, a group of teens and ghost stories about what happened there years ago. Other creepy locales include When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole, which is set in a possibly haunted house in a gentrified neighborhood. And The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware involves a nanny accused of murdering a child in a smart home. So that's kind of the opposite of a Gothic mansion. And what does the home know? Finally, if you love family drama, book club fiction, horror has some plenty twisted family drama too. Let's start with The House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. This is a retelling of the fairy tale, The 12 Dancing Princesses, only the group of the dozen sisters keeps getting smaller as they keep dying. Famlandia by Christina Dulcher is a dystopian similar to The Handmaid's Tale. It starts with a woman and her daughter seeking refuge in a women's-only colony, which may not be the sanctuary they were hoping. The End of Her by Sherry Lapina starts with a sleep-deprived mother of twins whose idyllic family might all be a sham when someone from her husband's past shows up. And My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite is a fascinating study in POV, showing the life of a serial killer from her siblings' perspective. She's a loving sister and an occasional conspirator after the fact. And then we have Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney, which checks a lot of horror boxes. It's set in a remote island in a creepy Gothic-style house with a family gathered for grandma's birthday party. And then the family members start dropping dead with creepy cryptic notes about the past. This is one of my favorites from the family messed up subgrouping on this list. And I actually went back to reread to find clues after I'd finished it. So there we have it. I think this is 33 horror genre recommendations, almost all of them released within the last 10 years. And they're all books that I've read and recommend. And before I made this list, here I thought that I didn't really read a lot of horror fiction. Granted, and there were some that didn't make the list. Granted, there are fewer horrors on this genre than I read of other ones, but in honor of Halloween, if you're looking for a scary story, why not give one of these a try? If you want more book recommendations and weekly tips about writing, editing, and the writing life, like, follow, subscribe this YouTube channel, and see all of my weekly videos that come out on Sundays. And you can also check out my website, mirandadarrow.com. Until later, happy writing!